Breaking news! The tropics are heating up. There are multiple disturbances in the Atlantic, one of which has a pretty good chance to become the next named storm of the season, and possibly even a hurricane as it moves into the Caribbean. In this video, we'll be looking at this tropical activity, and we'll also look at the severe weather across the US and the extreme heat across the South that will continue for a while. But first, if you're new here, please be sure to hit the subscribe button for more of these weather updates. So, this is the Atlantic satellite imagery, and here's the disturbance 1, I guess. This is Invest 94, actually, and then this is Invest 95, which actually just recently got upgraded to an Invest, and then there's actually, these are the two that are actually on the NHC, which we'll see in a minute, but, you know, there's actually a third one just off the coast of Africa, another tropical wave, that this one is also going out into the Atlantic, and it could become something as well. But this one right here, Disturbance 2, is the one to watch as it goes into the Caribbean. So this is the NHC. This is their 7-day tropical weather outlook. This is Disturbance 1, Disturbance 2. So this is not really gonna do anything. Like, it could try to form, but this one doesn't really look like much. You know, a 10 to 20% chance of tropical cyclone formation over the next 7 days. But this one has actually gotten upgraded pretty quickly and designated as an Invest 95. And it says that environmental conditions are going to be unusually conducive for late June across, you know, the central and western tropical Atlantic. This is the main development region, which usually, you know, there is Saharan dust actually, you know, covering a big section of the Atlantic, but even with that, this is, you know, unusual to have, you know, significant main development region activity this early in the season. Now, this has a 30% chance of forming in the next 48 hours, but a 60% chance in the next 7 days. And so that's a pretty quick upgrade from, I think it was 40% before. And so, you know, this is kind of what it looks like on the 2-day graphical outlook. You know, and this is that third disturbance. They haven't, you know, put anything on that yet, but it's going to be there behind Disturbance 2. So, you know, this is going into the Caribbean, so if this does form, it will definitely bring impacts into the Caribbean. And this is Invest 94. Not really much with that. There is, you know, a couple of models trying to say, oh, it's going to become a tropical storm, maybe a Category 1. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, a lot of the models are really showing it a really weak system with that. So, you know, I don't think that one's going to really do much, but this one is the one apparently that looks pretty concerning on a lot of the models. Like, you know, right now it actually looks, on the satellite imagery, decently organized, actually. And then here's the GEPS. I think this is the JEPS and Ensemble. You know, it's showing a decent storm anywhere between 990 and 1,000 millibars on a lot of the models there. And this is from 12Z, 7 or 8 a.m. Eastern time. But basically, this is from before. They're showing a system, but even that is not that strong. But then, this is more recent, a lot stronger. Even 970s on some of these Ensemble models. Like, really showing a much stronger system on the GEFS. And the newer runs are really a lot stronger, and it does pull to the north a bit more if it rapidly strengthens. But, you know, there's that. And also, this is the intensity guidance, also shows possibly a Category 2, maybe even a Category 3 hurricane from the few models that they have on this, because this is pretty new, like, that they've actually put this on here as an Invest. This is the GFS model showing that one disturbance. It really doesn't do much of anything, but notice this Disturbance 2. So this is Disturbance 2, and then notice there's something behind it. That will be just the third, you know, disturbance. But, you know, this intensifies pretty quickly and goes over, like, Barbados, like some of these islands in the Caribbean, and then this moves towards the towards even going over Jamaica possibly. But then you have another system, so this could be two systems following each other going over the Caribbean. That's possible. This may or may not happen with that third system, but this one, this second disturbance, does look concerning to have it. Conditions are apparently unusually favorable for development. So, we'll have to see what happens with that. And this is going down to like 974 millibars. So that's a Category 2 hurricane before it hits Jamaica. And then it kind of weakens, but then it could re-intensify a little bit before it hits the Yucatan. And then it possibly, intensifies some more. So this could be a sort of long-tracked hurricane if this happens this way. This goes all the way, this could be forming as soon as maybe, this weekend, as the NHC was saying. It's like, and then July 1st, and then this goes all the way through, July 4th, going all the way through July 7th, July 8th, possibly, before it slams into Mexico and disappears. That's disturbance 2, or Invest 95. This other system behind it could actually hit some of the same areas before it actually apparently runs into the Dominican Republic, apparently on the GFS. So this is just the GFS, but the basic idea is there's going to be two systems, and also this Invest 95 is going to, go through the Caribbean and possibly strengthen into a substantial system. And this is the shear is not super intense on these storms, because the shear is actually pointed away from the storms in this model, so it looks like there could be this sort of anticyclonic kind of feature over the storms, which, especially this Invest 95, that could really help to allow the storm to intensify. That's pretty much what it looks like is going to happen, apparently. So really not that much shear on the storm. The second one could have a bit more shear, so that third disturbance could, it might not intensify as much. It probably won't, but this Invest 95 is the thing to really look at. But the shear is going to be below average across this whole Caribbean and the that main development region, below average shear. And the Euro is saying the same thing with Invest 95, and it doesn't show that other disturbance really doing much of anything. So that's a questionable system. But Invest 95, this is what it shows with that. It shows it intensifying pretty good, and it goes over these Windward Islands like Barbados and places like that, and then it goes to the Caribbean and it intensifies really intense, going all the way down to 947 millibars before it gets towards the Yucatan, and that's in 10 days. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, so the Euro is saying the exact same thing, almost a very similar track also. So it seems like these models all of a sudden are really showing the same thing, and even the CMC model is showing the same thing, like a pretty intense system. Not as strong as some of the other models are showing, but still a tropical storm, maybe a weak hurricane going through the Caribbean. So you have all three of those major global models agree that there's going to be a potentially significant system from Invest 95. And then these are the Euro Ensemble tracks. This is Invest 94, this is Invest 95, this is a third system. You have basically, that one, it could try to intensify into something weak, but it probably not. This one looks a lot more intense. You have a lot more, confidence around this one becoming a decent system, even at least 60, 70 knots, possibly even 100 knots on some of the ensembles. but this is, pretty intense, and some of the stronger ones, of course, are going to pull to the north. But this is showing in this whole area, definitely, possibly a big storm. This is July 3rd going into July 4th, and potentially a very significant storm. This is not good to see this, only a month into the hurricane season. This is like stuff you would see closer to like August or September if this is going to happen. I think this is probably an extreme perspective, but who knows? Like, this is, yeah, this is not good to have something like this. Yeah, that's really not good. And then this is the GEFS, kind of showing same thing with that Invest 94, not much of anything within. The GFS is not showing as much with this. Now, it does show that third disturbance kind of doing something, but it's actually not as intense with Invest 95. On that run of the GEFS, the newer version might be a bit stronger with that one, and somewhat, but not really. The euro is really just going crazy with this one. This is actually Invest 95. This is the euro. Yeah, a lot of tracks showing this becoming a major hurricane. That's not something you want to see, especially going through the Caribbean and in July. And then the GEFS is not as intense with this storm, but the euro's just really going wild on this one, and showing in 5 days, basically 120 hours, this going over some of the islands in the Caribbean, or starting to, as possibly a hurricane. It's like, yeah, that's not good. And this is happening supposedly under a neutral or slightly unfavorable phase of the MJO. So that's really bad, because you have these supposedly unfavorable conditions, but at the same time it's still extremely unusually favorable for intensification in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. It's like, that's not good, because you have this sinking phase and unfavorable conditions happening June 26th, July 1st to July 6th, July 11th. Before then, it's going to get more favorable, supposedly, on this version of the 40-day forecast, going towards mid to late July, and then into early August, possibly going into a pretty favorable phase. And then the shear is actually significantly below average, down to what the average would be in September, and we're not even in July yet. So that's pretty concerning. And then even in the tropical Atlantic, it's below even what it would be in September. This is down to possibly an average of about like 11 knots of shear. That's not even that much shear. And then, actually, let's see what the Euro model shows for shear. It shows it being even less shear and more of this extreme anticyclone over the storm. That would make it extremely favorable for having, a major hurricane or a rapidly intensifying system. You have, an anticyclone over the storm. And the shear anomaly is extremely below average still, so that's not good. And then you have, this is the, Saharan dust. You have a bunch of dust, but then, this storm, maybe the dust could be a bit thinner, in a few days when the system tries to intensify. So that could put, kind of help prevent this from really strengthening, but we'll see what happens. And this is showing the tropical intensity index is pretty favorable over, the Gulf, the kind of the extreme southwestern Caribbean, and, part of the Southwest Atlantic. and then starting to go towards these, Windward Islands. Highly favorable, apparently. But then some of these other areas right now are unfavorable, could become favorable potentially, in a few days. Sea surface temperatures are also there, for pretty decent systems, like 85-ish, like mid 80s basically in this whole area. So definitely the sea surface temperatures are above average there, where this system is supposed to be developing, pretty far above average. And then you have the upper ocean heat content is there too, especially further south, which is interesting that this storm is kind of going further south. So it's going to go into, if and the Euro could be really looking at that, where you have all this upper ocean heat content, going, this storm would basically be going right in here. So that's where all that heat content is, and that would definitely, with the other favorable conditions, allow it to rapidly intensify into a pretty intense system. So yeah, this Invest 95 could become, Tropical Storm Beryl, could become Hurricane Beryl in the next few days, and could impact the Caribbean. So definitely want to keep watching that system. Also, at the same time, the East Pacific hasn't had anything. Like, even the GFS right now is showing nothing really happening in the Eastern Pacific. Maybe a weak storm, but, still very quiet over the Eastern Pacific, which is unusual because the Eastern Pacific season starts May 15th. Usually you're going to see, a couple of storms. Even in an inactive or a below average East Pacific season, you're going to have at least a couple of storms. There haven't been any at all, which is, I think this is officially going to be the latest. If nothing forms in the next 2 weeks, that's going to be definitely the latest start to an East Pacific hurricane season. And right now we're at the bottom of activity, and this doesn't mean that we won't see anything. We could, but it does look very unfavorable in the Eastern Pacific for pretty much the entire season. We'll see what happens, but we're at the bottom of what the least active Eastern Pacific hurricane season, and yeah, so that's interesting that the Atlantic is starting to really heat up with potentially more significant systems, but the Eastern Pacific, nothing. And then and we have all this Atlantic activity, which is a couple disturbances, but we have this activity, possibly a hurricane, some models showing a major hurricane potentially under this unfavorable phase kind of with the sinking air over the Atlantic. Of course, over the Eastern Pacific there's nothing, but over the Atlantic it's we do have some of the rising air over the eastern part of the main development region, but then it really looks like by June 30th a lot of really sinking air happening, and then it just looks really unfavorable. But then you do have some areas where it could be more favorable in between that. So just because it looks like, oh, it's unfavorable, it doesn't mean you can't have systems. It just means that it's less favorable to have a lot of activity. And at some point it will get, apparently it'll get more unfavorable over time, because July 3rd to July 9th, there is a 20% chance of something forming, according to the Climate Prediction Center on their Global Tropics Hazards Outlook. There is, a 20% chance of something forming in the Caribbean or the Southern Gulf for week 2, July 3rd to July 9th. But then, July 10th to the 16th, apparently a lot of below average precipitation. Of course, the Pacific, totally inactive, really. At least nothing highlighted for activity. And then also the Atlantic, it could be quiet. They might add something at some point, but it does look like at some point it might toned down, but that could change too, because before it didn't really look like anything, but now we have a potential system. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens with that. Also, with the severe weather across the U.S. today, we have the day one outlook, really, kind of east of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, kind of a slight risk of severe weather also in the south, and then across, from the Ohio Valley all the way over to the mid-Atlantic, a 2% chance of tornadoes over Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, and also kind of southern New York. But then, mostly, this is going to be wind, and then potentially some hail, some large hail over, east of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, maybe a little bit of Nebraska and Wyoming. Then we have potentially more severe weather, possibly more significant severe weather over, kind of the just east of the Rocky Mountains from Montana all the way over to Nebraska, and the Dakotas, an enhanced risk of severe weather. This is for tomorrow, Thursday, and then that's a 5% chance of tornadoes, actually a 30% significant chance of strong winds, and a 15% significant chance of large hail. And then, day 3, this goes into Friday, you have another slight risk of severe weather, and then, nothing else on the SPC after that. But then the CSU model is showing potentially more slight risks of severe weather. Potentially, 15 to 30% chance of severe weather, on day 3 or day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, and then day 8, it kind of tones down by 4th of July. And this is the NAM model kind of just showing, scattered severe thunderstorms, tomorrow afternoon and evening, going across, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, even down into Nebraska, potentially even Kansas. But, there's, there could be some, maybe a couple tornadoes, but, large hail and strong winds. This is a sounding marginal tornado probability. There's a lot of cape. There's, there's some shearing and everything, but probably mostly hail, potentially tornadoes. And there's that. And then apparently the supercell composite tomorrow is not extremely high. It does get pretty high along these as these storms are going through, but you do have, maybe a chance of a tornado. They're saying 56% chance of a tornado and 59% chance of significant hail, anywhere from 2 to 4.5 inches. Potentially, we'll see, but then it does show sort of capping also at the same time, but a lot of shear and a lot of instability. So, yeah, potential severe weather tomorrow with that, and then even this significant tornado parameter, not that high. It does get, to like a 2 or a 3 as some of those storms are going through, but not a huge severe weather event, but there is potential for that. And also strong winds. Like, you could have isolated wind gusts over, 75 to 80 miles an hour with some of the storms, but generally like 60 to 70 miles an hour. And even some of the storms start like earlier, like maybe 2 p.m., and then this keeps going through, and you have across this area, just thunderstorms with strong wind gusts going through that whole enhanced and even the slight risk area. And then this is the helicity tracks. This is just showing, potential, updrafts, hail, maybe tornadoes, but basically it looks like western Nebraska possibly is the strongest with some of these tracks, and then it actually goes into even Friday night. You could have some storms going through Nebraska, Kansas, this is actually under a marginal risk, but even they have a slight risk over here, as some of the storms might go into that area. But some of the storms are actually going into the slight risk area, even just leftover storms from Thursday. And then, but it does look like there could be some strong storms, maybe, linear thunderstorms going through where they have that slight risk, possibly strong winds with that. But then here's kind of what the weather pattern is doing. You have that severe weather happening out ahead of this kind of trough, and that huge, ridge bringing the extreme heat, kind of, it tones down, but then see what happens. That ridge starts really building in again, like with above average height, so even more heat than usual. And then you have that trough. This is by Saturday evening, going into the Midwest, kind of, or the Great Lakes region, and then you have more ridging, really expands up, but then you have another trough by going into next, basically Monday evening. By July 1st, you have another trough, maybe severe weather with that, we'll see. But then more ridging kind of expands, and then it kind of comes down. But then you have a lot of ridging over the West Coast, and then maybe more troughing over the Midwest, and then the tropical system at the same time over the Yucatan. So that's by July 6th. And these are just the temperatures over the next 10 days. You see some extreme heat, surges in Texas and Arizona, southeastern California, just, even going into like 106 degrees across, Oklahoma and Texas. And then it starts cooling down a little bit, but then it starts, heating up again over the Southwest, and then it gets really hot over California by July 2nd. That would be Tuesday evening, 109 degrees, 110 degrees over northern and central California. And then it gets even worse, possibly in central California, 114 degrees. So that's not good. If there's going to be this huge, heat wave across the western U.S., that's going to be some more extreme heat over there. And it looks like it gets worse, or stays about the same, but, could get even worse for some areas, getting close to 120 degrees in the Southwest. And the heat index is going to be pretty bad. You have heat indexes going into, getting close to 110 in Texas. In some of these areas, heat indexes will approach 110 degrees, even as far north as Kansas on Friday. And then this continues into the weekend, possibly really getting close to 110, 111 degrees across Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi. So definitely, that heat just surges. And it really, across the South, especially 110 degree heat indexes could be a problem. And then, that just continues July 1st, Tuesday, Wednesday, even going towards 4th of July, you have heat across the South. In the West, the heat is going to be drier, so the heat indexes will actually be lower than the actual temperature. But, still, just really hot temperatures continue across the U.S. And then you have, this is the 8 to 14 day hazards outlook. You have, of course, excessive heat across the excessive heat, a pretty high risk of, a pretty moderate risk, actually. This is a moderate risk of excessive heat from July 4th to July 6th across the South and the Southeast. even going up the East Coast a little bit with a slight risk of excessive heat. Apparently, from July 4th to 10th, they don't really have a huge risk of excessive heat over the western U.S., so that's interesting. And then a slight to moderate risk of heavy rain over Arizona and New Mexico, part of the monsoon. And then that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching this video. Please be sure to give it a like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more weather updates. Extreme Weather Zone